As if diving from a high cliff into water, you shoot between the dimensions and back into your body, with no memory of what has happened. But just like a stone being thrown into a still pond, your entrance from one dimension to another causes a ripple effect in the program, which translates into a deep, ominous trembling in the cavern. Your eyes open. Above you looms the high priest, swaying in a trance, his unseeing eyes rolling back in his head as the drumming surrounding you intensifies into something powerful and dangerous. But suddenly the music is cut off, and a panicked roaring fills the cavern amidst anguished yelling, as a violent shaking is accompanied by stones and boulders crashing down from the ceiling above. As bones crack and bodies shatter beneath immense stone slabs, ear-splitting screams pierce through a massive surge of panicked bellowing as the shaking intensifies and torches fall from the walls, igniting those trapped below, their faces contorting in pain. Within moments, the drug-laced smoke is mingled with the putrid scent of burning flesh and hair. Amidst the chaos, Matthew's captors drop his arms and flee as the sinister celebration transforms into a sea of men running, stampeding, shoving and trampling one another, until there is nothing but an immovable wall of bodies pressed tightly together. Pushing his way past men with glistening, crazed eyes, Matthew moves in the opposite direction of the horde, climbing over rocks and stricken bodies. When Matthew is just a few feet away from you, the earthquake intensifies. The high priest stumbles backward and trips over a thick slab of rock that has fallen directly behind him. His arms pinwheel momentarily until he lands flat on his back, hitting his head with a sickening crack. His body jerks once and then goes completely still as dark red blood spreads slowly over the rock beneath him. Matthew wraps his arms around you, protecting you with his body as he helps you sit up and slide to the floor, and then under the altar for protection.
"It's okay, you're all right,"
he says, holding your shaking body in his arms.
"How did you get in here?"
Your head is spinning, but you manage to collect your thoughts. "There's a hole in the wall behind that curtain," you say, pointing, "and a tunnel." When the tremor subsides, Matthew helps you stand up. Wrapping an arm around you, he steadies you as you climb over a massive rock slab and down the other side. He follows you along the wall until you come to a hidden opening. Terrified, you keep looking to see if anyone has followed you, but the cavern is now so dark it's impossible to tell. Matthew climbs up on a bench and yanks a torch from its holder. You hold the curtain open as he thrusts the torch into the tunnel and quickly moves inside, pulling you in directly behind him as the drape falls heavily back into place. "It's this way," you yell over the chaos. Matthew grabs your hand and you race along the passageway until the frantic screaming behind you gives way to silence, infused only with the sound of your own labored breathing. You both slow your pace a bit, but your entire body is still on high alert, adrenaline pulsing through you as you scan the cracks and crevices for any shapes that might suddenly materialize out of the darkness. Finally, you slow down and stop at a point where your path branches out into 3 separate tunnels. Gulping in the dank air, you know you had come from one of the tunnels, but at the time you were following the sound of drumming. and with only a small flashlight, you hadn't noticed the other tunnels coming out of nowhere. Matthew holds the torch aloft and walks slowly past the openings. But nothing looks familiar to you as each tunnel swallows the flickering light in shadow.
"Do you recognize anything?"
he says anxiously. "Give me a minute," you say breathlessly. Trying not to panic, you close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath, breathing in through your nose. From one direction, you notice a musty infusion of things rotting and rodents, both dead and alive. Pointing to the tunnel on the left, you say definitively, "It's not that tunnel. We're looking for a tunnel with fresh air."
"You think there's fresh air down here?"
says Matthew, bewildered. "I know that sounds impossible," you say, "but I was told to look for it, and I know it's here somewhere." You then focus on the middle tunnel as Matthew steps closer to the passageway on the right. A moment later, Matthew says excitedly,
"I think this is it."
You move to the other tunnel and hold still for a moment. There is nothing more than the tiniest breath of air, but there is a hint of something fresh and alive. "This isn't the tunnel I was in before, but I think it's where we need to go," you say breathlessly. The passageway slopes down steeply, and within a few hundred yards, you come to a dead end, in front of a massive ventilation system, at least 8 feet high, with a small vented doorway. Matthew turns the handle and opens the door.
"You're sure this is the way?"
he asks. You poke your head inside. "I think so," you say hesitantly. 2 rows of tiny lights run along the ceiling. It isn't bright, but you can definitely see, so Matthew puts out the torch on the tunnel floor and pushes it out of sight in a small crack beneath the vent. Tentatively, you crawl through the small opening one at a time, and then stand up inside as Matthew pulls the door tightly shut and twists the handle securely back into place. You are already facing the direction of the breeze and say, "It's this way, I'm sure of it."
"Do you think this could be taking us to one of those parks we saw when we first arrived here at the base?"
asks Matthew pensively. "Maybe," you say hesitantly, "but I was told there would be a tunnel with fresh air, and that it would lead to a place where none of the soldiers were allowed to go."
"Well, if it is outdoors, let's hope we can get out when we get there,"
says Matthew anxiously.
"For now, let's walk as fast as we can. If we run, we'll make too much noise, and we need to distance ourselves from that doorway."
You nod in agreement, and after walking quietly for about 15 minutes, you say, "I don't think anyone's coming after us, do you?"
"If soldiers start running, we'll hear it echoing through the vent,"
says Matthew as he stops and looks carefully around.
"As far as I can tell, there are no cameras or sensors in here. Do you need a rest?"
"Maybe we could just sit down for a few minutes," you say wearily. Sitting side by side, Matthew holds your gaze and says softly,
"I thought I'd never see you again."
"I know," you say, blinking back hot tears. Matthew's fingertips skim across your forehead, outline your ear, trace along your cheek and down your neck. Moving onto his back, he gently pulls you down and into his arms. You lay on your side with your head on his chest and your arm around his waist. Warmth blossoms and swirls through your body as you place your hand on his stomach, accidentally touching his bare skin. Matthew unbuttons his shirt as you skim your hand along the unfamiliar landscape of his flat stomach and over his muscular chest, feeling the heat of his skin and his response to your touch. Everything about his body is so beautiful and breathtakingly different than your own. Matthew pulls you up onto his chest, your bodies pressing together as his warm hands slide under your shirt and along your back. Then he gently kisses you in a way you have never been kissed before. His lips, full and soft, barely touch yours, and every nerve in your body lights up the moment his tongue traces along your lower lip. Melting into him, you return his kiss, and your heart beats as if tiny hummingbirds are fluttering through your body, transforming into light as they escape through your chest. Nothing exists but the softness of his lips pressing into yours as he holds you tightly. Suddenly, Matthew stops kissing you and pulls back.
Listen,
he whispers urgently. At first, there's only silence, but then you hear something too. Looking at him puzzled, you say, "I'd swear it's a bird singing."
are you okay to keep going?
Says Matthew with concern. Smiling a bit awkwardly, you look into his eyes and say, "Yeah, I'm ready." Holding your hand as you walk, Matthew says quietly,
I haven't seen you in days. Where have you been? How did you end up at that satanic ritual or whatever the hell it was?
Without going into too much detail, you do your best to explain everything that has happened to you, from your experiences in the Montauk chair to the moment you appeared in the cavern yelling for the high priest to stop. "Of all the things I've been through," you say, "the strangest thing was Asha telling me that I could imagine the world of the Vedras into reality. I mean, she said it would be my own version of that reality, and that I have to focus on what I want instead of what I don't want. Honestly, I don't even know how that could be true, but if it is, I'm obviously much better at creating what I don't want," you say, feeling like a total failure.
Do you know how to drive a stick shift? Says Matthew out of the blue.
Caught completely off guard, you laugh and say, "No."
Well, I read about it online. I watched my dad and I thought it would be easy. But it took more practice than I thought to get to the point where I could drive on autopilot. So maybe what you're talking about is kind of the same thing. Maybe it just takes practice. And then one day you'll be doing it without thinking,
he says kindly. You smile warmly at him and say, "I guess you're right. I do overanalyze things sometimes."
I can relate,
says Matthew, laughing gently. "So tell me what happened to you. How long did they keep you in a coma?" you say anxiously.
A coma?
Says Matthew, surprised.
I was drugged and unconscious for a while,
he says thoughtfully.
But I don't think I was ever in a coma.
"But I saw you," you say emphatically. "You were on life support."
Well, here's what I remember,
says Matthew.
When I went with Trevor, she told me that instead of further testing, I could choose to be involved in a brief research project. She said I would be paid $20,000 and that you and I could live in military housing rather than the psych ward, and that it was a one-time offer because their test subject had just dropped out and they needed someone right away. She told me I would be temporarily unconscious, but that it would be harmless in the end. It was supposedly research being conducted on how we perceive time without seeing the sun, and they would keep track of me when I naturally slept and wanted to eat, stuff like that. And she said she would tell you so you wouldn't worry.
What did they do to you? You say uneasily.
I was taken to a room loaded with hospital equipment. They had me lie in a bed and gave me a shot. I don't know what they did after that,
he says.
Maybe they hooked me up to life support and then disconnected me. All I know is that when I came to, I was in a padded room, like I was in a psych ward again. I felt a bit lightheaded, but I don't think I was out for long, and all of the equipment was gone. I couldn't hear anything, not even sounds in the hall. When I was ready to sleep, I turned off my light, and when I woke up, I turned it on. If I wanted a meal, I put my dishes in a doorway in the wall, and then I'd close the door on my side, and it would automatically open with a meal. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't get fed.
How did you end up in that cave temple place? You ask.
I totally lost track of time, but at some point I found a black cape in the cubbyhole where they put my meals. I took it out and I wasn't going to put it on, but then they wouldn't feed me. So I put the cape on and then meals appeared. I quickly figured out that if I wanted to eat, I had to be wearing the cape, which was just bizarre. And then one time I put the cape on, but rather than the meal appearing, the door to my room opened. I walked out, and it was like a hospital corridor. You know, like with fluorescent lighting and tiled floors, and everything smells like a hospital. But all of the rooms were closed, and it seemed like everything was completely deserted. And then I heard this steady drumming. I followed the sound, but I didn't feel like I was running away or leaving the experiment because there was no place else to go. I felt like a rat in a maze, but anything was better than being stuck in that room,
says Matthew, shaking his head.
And then I came to these two metal doors, double doors, just regular doors, and the drumming was coming from the room beyond. But when I opened the door, there was a thick curtain hanging about 6 feet in front of me. And when I went inside and opened the curtain, I saw the temple and ceremony going on. At first, I couldn't see a thing. But now that I think about it, it just seems so bizarre that these double doors in a hospital wing would open up into a cavern,
says Matthew, at a complete loss.
I saw men in cloaks that matched mine. So I pulled the hood over my head and went further in. But then I saw those 4 girls down by the altar, and even from where I stood I could tell they were hypnotized or drugged or something. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know if it was part of some weird experiment. But I was afraid of what was going to happen to the girls, so I just started walking down the aisle. No one paid any attention to me until I saw you and yelled out your name. And everything else from that point, you know.
You shake your head and say, that ritual must have been some kind of bizarre setup. How else would you have a cape? And then suddenly your door just opens and the cavern is the only place you can go?
Matthew is quiet for a moment. You know, if you think about all of this like a story problem, you have to strip away the story to understand the equation. So if we forget about the ritual, how I got there, how you got there, and we only focus on what happened, there was one major occurrence. You died and came back to life.
Oh my God, you say in a shocked tone. Death is really just a trip to another dimension. It's just that people rarely come back. But still, that's exactly what Thomas did with the Montauk chair. He was trying to see if I could go to another dimension and return with information, and with my mind intact. And since the chair was destroyed, What if he created the ritual not to kill me, but to send me into another dimension with the idea that I would come back with information?
That's pretty risky, says Matthew. How could he have known that you would come back to life?
You close your eyes. Maybe he had plans to bring me back to life, but I came back first.
You and an earthquake, says Matthew. That can't be a coincidence.
I'm not sure if I'm right or just making this up, you say. But when I imagine Thomas without, an opinion, I feel this horrendous fear. Not like I'm afraid of him, but it's as if he's desperately afraid of dying, or afraid of what he'll find when he gets there. What if he set up the whole ritual to kill me, so he could pretend to save me and then ask me questions after?
Do you remember anything at all? Asks Matthew.
I don't have any visual images, you say, but I have a feeling I was there for a long time. And I think I know what he's afraid of, but it's only a feeling, not an actual memory I could describe.
What you're saying makes sense. And here's something else. Thomas can see the past and future with remote viewing. He's capable of knowing everything we say or do. What if it's all smoke and mirrors, and everything has been orchestrated with nothing left to chance? What if we're meant to think we have choices, but we really don't?
It's just like you said. We're like rats in a maze, you say, freaking out. Thomas can close and open doors until we go wherever he wants us to go. And every step of the way we do everything thinking we were choosing it, when in fact we have no choice. Stopping and turning to Matthew, you say, "What should we do?"
I don't know, says Matthew, shaking his head.
As you stand there quietly contemplating what to do next, you suddenly hear songbirds singing all at once. Oh my God, it's not just a bird trapped in a tunnel. Those birds must be outdoors, you say excitedly.
Wait,
says Matthew, his head cocked, listening. Then he drops down onto his stomach, with his head turned to one side and his ear against the metal floor. Jumping up, he grabs your hand and whispers loudly, "Run! They're coming!" Weak and lightheaded, you try desperately to keep up with him. Though you can barely breathe as pain rips through your body, you race on with Matthew pulling you along. Within minutes you hear voices growing louder in the tunnel and the pounding, ringing sound of boots running on metal. Then a voice yelling, "This way!" Running full out, you and Matthew abruptly come to a dead end and are met with a vented doorway. Matthew skids to a stop and examines the door. There is no handle, so he tries kicking the door open with his foot, but it is securely bolted shut. Frantically, you spin around, trying to find another exit point, as beams of bright halogen light zigzag across the tunnel walls, dazzling your eyes. And then you see a small red glowing light on the wall next to what appears to be a dark mirror. You punch the button with your fist as the soldiers bear down on you with huge blinding lights. You know there's no way you can make it past a facial scan, but there's nothing else you can do but stand there petrified as a long, slender light moves slowly from the top of your head to your chin and back. With the commotion of at least 10 soldiers running heavily in your direction, you never hear the quiet click or realize the door is opening until Matthew yells, "Amelia, come on!" as he grabs your hand.
Halt! Halt! Stay where you are!
A voice echoes from 20 feet away. Matthew pulls you through a round portal that is in the process of spiraling open. Squeezing through the exit, you find yourselves on a narrow cliff in a world you could never have imagined. One of the soldiers, racing at top speed, beats the others to the opening, but stops dead as the portal begins spiraling closed. Though he could easily have stepped through the opening, he stands there, gradually joined by the others, as they all stare dumbfounded at the scene before them. Terrified and unable to move, you wait for the soldiers to come after you, but instead, the opening continues to close in its spiraling motion, and to your surprise, blends perfectly with the surrounding rocks and moss. Why aren't they coming after us? Where are we? You say in astonishment.
I have no idea,
says Matthew as he leads you quickly along the edge of the cliff. Overhead, an intensely blue sky is layered with white cumulus clouds, tinged with dusty rose. Even the dense forest canopy nearby is dotted in pink, but it is the hot pink of a raucous bunch of Australian galah parrots, gabbling like hundreds of ladies at tea with their feathery white hats, speaking a language all their own. A trembling sensation shakes the ground, and the flock rises all at once, circling above the treetops as they spin out of sight. You and Matthew cling fast to the rock wall for support, as stones and small rocks skitter down the hillside above and below you. As you both head down a winding path, you say, "This can't be the desert." Matthew shakes his head.
I've hiked here since I was a kid. I've never seen a forest like this. And where did those tropical birds come from unless they all escaped from a zoo?
Looking at you, he confesses,
I'm as confused as you are. We did a lot of traveling underground in the base, but even if we traveled hundreds of miles in any direction, we would either be in the desert or the mountains.
The trail leads you to a point where it crosses over a bubbling brook, wending its way along the edge of the forest. Whether it is safe to drink the water or not, you both drop onto your stomachs and drink cold handfuls from the creek until you're both fully satisfied. You both sit on the soft grass bordering the creek. You take a deep breath and close your eyes as the warm sunlight filters down through the trees, turning the leaves bright green as it dances across your face. Your body hasn't felt relaxed in days, but now the sun is shining. The birds are singing and everything feels fresh and new. You open your eyes and smile at Matthew, and then begin sobbing with relief. Matthew gently puts his arm around you and says quietly,
"Are you okay?"
"Yes," you sniffle. "I'm just so happy." Matthew's eyes are glowing as he looks at you, and then he wraps his arms around you, and you both burst out laughing. You laugh until finally you both just stretch out on the grass and close your eyes. You feel your body drifting off to sleep, when suddenly you're sitting bolt upright, fully alert. Matthew sits up too at once as you hear the thundering sound of galloping hoofbeats. You both jump to your feet, and moments later, a pure white stallion with a long mane and tail jumps over the creek and comes to an abrupt halt in front of you. Astride the horse is a freckled-faced girl, about 13 years old, with penetrating blue eyes and long dark auburn hair, riding with no bridle or saddle. "I'm Sophia," she says, jumping off her horse.
I'm Matthew.
But before he can introduce you, the girl says, "Yes, I know. Father sent me to get you." Then, without any further explanation, she adds, "You're safe here. The soldiers won't come after you, but we need to hurry. There's not much time. Follow me," she says, as she walks toward the trail that borders the forest.
"Where are you taking us?"
says Matthew, walking quickly to catch up. "It's right down that hill," says the girl. "What's down the hill?" you ask, confused. "The settlement," says Sophia. "But we have to hurry. We've been having earthquakes, and they're not stopping. We all need to be someplace safe." "But aren't we safest being outdoors?" you say. "We're not outdoors," says Sophia, walking even more quickly. "This is a biosphere."
"What?"
says Matthew, shocked. "It's 150 miles in diameter. The sky is holographic, but there's a layer of rock above that, and that's why we're not safe. Hurry," she says, as her horse jogs slowly next to her. A few minutes later, the forest just sort of drops away, and before you are velvety rolling hills, bearing vast stretches of wildflowers, ranging in color from sapphire blue to the most luminous yellows stretching out before you. In the distance are dense mountain forests that seem to embrace and protect the valley below. The girl stops suddenly, pats her horse on the neck, and then with the slightest motion of her hand, the horse takes off at a gallop down a narrow grassy path. Following Sophia, you and Matthew run along the crest of the hill until you see a sweeping emerald valley, complete with a languid river running through it, to a point where at last it pours itself into a sparkling clear lake. You both climb with ease down a wide path of soft grassy mounds squishing beneath your feet as you step carefully over small rocks and around colorful wildflowers. At the base of the hill you find a variety of tropical fruit trees and wild berries growing everywhere. Matthew surveys the scene and says quietly to you,
"You'd have to make an effort to starve here."
"If you're hungry," says Sophia, "Father will have plenty of food for you. It won't be long until we're there." You continue walking quickly for a few more minutes until you come to a settlement nestled into the valley. Widely spaced plots of land, dotted with houses, are surrounded by trees and gardens. You recognize everything you're seeing, and you wonder how the world of the Vedras has been reborn in this place. When you reach the small community, children run up to greet you, peppering Sophia with questions and staring wide-eyed at you. Sweetly but firmly, Sophia says, "Father is waiting for us. You can talk to our new friends later. Now go back inside where you're safe." Obeying her, the children run inside the nearest house. Finally, you come to a homestead at the outer edge of the settlement. Sophia calls out in a happy voice, "Father! Father!"
"Sophia!"
a voice sings out from the orchard as a tall man with a large mustache waves from beneath a tree where he is gathering apples. Striding toward you with long, purposeful steps, the man approaches, grinning from ear to ear.
"Here you are,"
he says heartily to Sophia, you, and Matthew all at once, as if he has been expecting you. You notice that the man is a good 5 or 6 inches taller than Matthew, who is over 6 feet tall himself. He has a long nose, angular jaw, and short-cropped, jet-black hair, parted down the middle, framing his deep-set eyes and black, bushy eyebrows. There is a certain intensity about the man's appearance, but all of this is softened by his dark brown eyes, sparkling with kindness and permanently creased at the outer edges by smile lines. Matthew leans toward you and whispers, "He looks exactly like Nikola Tesla when he was young." The man beams at Matthew and says, "That's because I am Nikola Tesla." Matthew's jaw drops. The Nikola Tesla I'm talking about was born in the mid-1800s. 1856, to be exact, says the man warmly. Matthew stares at him skeptically and says, "The Tesla I'm talking about died as an old man in the 1940s. "I know. That's what most people believe," he says enigmatically. "Will you excuse me for just one moment?" he says as he motions to Sophia. "If there's a tremor, just run inside the house," he adds. Then he begins talking quietly to the girl as they walk together to the main pathway. When they are out of earshot, Matthew says excitedly to you, "Do you know who Nikola Tesla is?" "I've heard the name, but I don't know anything about him," you say, shaking your head. "I wrote a paper on him last semester. He's one of the most brilliant men who ever lived. He's like the father of electricity," says Matthew, his voice filled with admiration. "If this man is Tesla, he's the one who invented the first radio, the AC motor, vacuum tubes, and hydroelectric generators. He developed a way to give free electricity to everyone in the world. But the funding was pulled out, and the power plant he was building was closed down before he was able to finish. And then his plans disappeared. Supposedly, all of his papers and experiments were stolen by the FBI when he died. Maybe everything just came here," Matthew adds in amazement. "I mean, it makes a strange sort of sense given everything else going on here. The military wanted his work. Tesla's technology and discoveries are connected with missiles, particle beam weaponry, satellites, and nuclear fission. It makes sense he'd end up here and they'd cover it up by faking his death." "Isn't he the one who created an earthquake machine?" you ask. "Apparently he didn't create it on purpose. He was experimenting with resonant frequencies and accidentally caused an earthquake, nearly flattened an entire city block." "But that doesn't explain how he could be 150 years old and look like he's 40 at the most," you say emphatically. "I know. That's the part I don't understand either," confesses Matthew. "But if he is telling the truth," you say, "what could explain him becoming young?" "Well, Tesla won a Nobel Peace Prize in medicine," says Matthew thoughtfully. "I thought he was a scientist, not a doctor," you say, now feeling even more confused. "It had something to do with deep heating tissues with high-frequency alternating currents. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was all about increasing blood circulation in a certain part of the body and getting rid of tumors." "Very good," says Tesla as he rejoins you. "Now you can guess my secret."